Alrighty, it is 11 o'clock, so we are going to go ahead and get started. I just want to say hello to everyone and thank you for joining today's webinar, The Convergence of Process Maturity and Digital Transformation. So before we get started, I just wanted to share some housekeeping items. First thing is everyone is muted and your video is off, but if you'd like to ask a question, please feel free to use the chat feature or wait until the Q&A portion of the presentation and I can unmute you if you'd like. Secondly, this webinar is being recorded and will be sent out to you afterwards. And lastly, if you have any follow-up questions after the webinar has ended, please feel free to email solutions@dyopath.com and we will get them directed to the right person. So, getting started, I'd like to introduce you to our panelists. Today we have Ken Garcia, our Director of New Business Development, and James Melcher, our Chief Technology Officer. And from here, I will hand it on over to you, Ken.
All right, thank you. So first of all, I just want to say thank you all for attending. I think the topic of digital transformation and operational maturity, process maturity, it's one that needs to be talked about. I think there's a lot of moving parts to it, and I'm super excited to get going and talk through it. So the agenda is here. And these are the things we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to encourage questions throughout as things come up. Feel free to throw them out there, and we'll do our best to answer those. And if you wouldn't mind, Jordan, let's get started. So the next slide is industry trends. And so, James, if you wouldn't mind just taking a couple minutes to go through some of the trends that we're seeing and talked about on a daily basis, nowadays. And I'd love to see, what you come up with and see what kind of questions we have around it.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. So really, the trends that we see right now, especially people that are stair-stepping into digital transformation for service management around how they are creating a digital workplace, really. So that means, how can I make processes more more efficient for human resources, HR teams? How can we really start that to be more efficient? Like, how can we put more of the process automation at their fingertips, right? And instead of being throughout the organization. Other things around facilities management, how are we automating requests, badge systems, changes throughout the offices, security components as well. Other really items around chat and really the introduction of chat bots and things like that, of how can we field requests, provide information to end users fairly quickly, give them the ability to search on certain knowledge articles and those type of things as well. So of course those are items that are out there. Really some of the other trends are just around new business models that are emerging, or really I would say, how do we scale with the business is kind of another trend. Is how can we start looking at the digital transformation associated with scale? How can we do things differently? Mergers and acquisitions and those type of things. And then the other part really is I wouldn't even call it a lagger, but really fear in the market of we have to automate everything. That's kind of starting to trend as well. As I have to do everything with automation, but there's a lot that needs to be done with automation before you start moving it towards that really towards that pretty quickly. And I think we're probably going to cover that in the next slide as well.
So hey James, sorry, I just want to take a step backwards. So and just set the tone or make sure everybody understands. The term digital transformation gets used a lot. How do you personally define digital transformation, and in particular, like it says in service management underneath it? So, why is that in service management added? Is that because it's such a wide topic? Can you give us some color around just what is digital transformation?
Yeah, digital transformation is a very broad term. Really think about like digitizing processes. So, a lot of people still print out emails and take that data and input them into other systems. So there's still more of a manual process of that. So if we're talking about digital transformation, it's, how am I digitizing that data? How am I getting it into a way to automate it? That for the in-service management piece, there still are companies that are what I would say are still running manual processes out of their IT service management platforms. They're not using self-service, and if they are using self-service, again, like examples, they're printing certain things out or they're following manual tasks, and they're not utilizing automated processes and things like that.
So, so is digital transformation using automation, or is it the digitalization of information so that you can do something with it, or is it both? I mean, give me a little
It's
bit more there.
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. So, one is identifying the data that can be digitized, right? Like, how can I do that? Then, secondly, it's how do I start to integrate the system so that the data is portable then at that point in time? That way, you can start utilizing automation features to be able to move that data around, process data. Then you make it really more actionable at that point in time.
So when you say portable, like the data's portable, does that mean that it's literally moving all of the data sets from one place to another, or is it making it accessible to other tools, systems, people, whatever it might be, so that they could actually access it? What do you
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah, so it could be both, right? Depending on the structure of the organization, you might have the data that gets extracted and moved into like a data warehouse. From then, it makes it accessible, bits and pieces of it from other systems. Other ones could be direct API integration, where now you're implementing applications that you can hook into via API to look at that data, extract the data that you need, then to move it into other systems to start automation flows, right? Quote to cash is a great example of that, of how you can take a sales opportunity record, take bits and pieces of it, drive it through operations, and then I'll take bits and pieces of that and your sales data and drive that into the accounting system to all the way to invoicing, right? That's a high level, example of that.
So I'm going to ask you to go a little bit deeper on that. So, bits and pieces. So, and this is just me trying to understand and actually
Yeah.
put like the practical application. So when you say bits and pieces of a quote going to operations, get a little bit more granular. So
Yeah.
is that like what products are coming so I could staff? Is that,
It
are
could be
there
the
going to be,
name.
I
Yeah,
don't
it
know,
could be the name of
excellent.
the yeah, it could be the name of the client required to set up in an ITSM. It could be the application name. It could be the product itself or the service, right? So those are all components that get recorded and then provisioned within other systems. So the bits and pieces are components that are required to do provisioning or processing in other systems. So, for example, Salesforce Opportunity has a quote and it has the price and it has the cost. That type of information is required on the financial side to create the invoice, along with the username and those or the client name as well. So being able to pass all that information and then pick up information from the other systems as well, and then push that into the financial system and back and forth, right? That is kind of the answer to your question of those are the bits and pieces that I'm referring to.
Got it. So, when I hear you talk about it, I feel that when we talk about digital transformation, it is taking information, moving it away from silos and like, I almost think about like a factory, right? Going from one place to the other,
Mhm.
to going from here to everywhere it needs to go all at once. So people are more informed and have real-time information. Is that the right way to look at it?
It is. I would look at it as like an ecosystem, right? if you use the factory kind of methodology that you're saying, or example, is it's kind of sequential, right? In all reality, it's not, because that same data that is going down that assembly line, a copy of it can go up and get processed differently to other systems, right? And then it feeds right back into the same financial systems, or the financial system. So it's not the sequential process. It has the availability and insight to be taken and pushed into other systems to kick off additional process and automations at the same time, right? Versus just here is my product at the end. You could have 7 products at the end from that one bit of information that now you're able to pull from one system, right?
Got it. So what I'm hearing there is, instead of data going in a linear fashion,
Mm-hmm.
it's going in a strategic fashion in the appropriate order in which it needs to, with the right triggers.
Mm-hmm.
But it goes and then it comes back together to meet in a final product, or ends its journey wherever it needs to for that to go along. And as I think about that, and all the different systems it needs to touch, along with all the different departments, it makes me question, and maybe can you explain the importance of pace in which we're doing it, and IT maturity, and how that relates to digital transformation, and the risk associated, or misalignment, and what you can do to sort of avoid going into the pitfalls of, this department's not ready for digital transformation, but the rest of it is. And how do you, just, can you talk about that? And maybe we can go to the next slide. Maybe we'll cover some of that.
Yeah, let's jump to the next slide, and then I'll touch on that one, answer that question.
Great.
So to answer your question, in all reality, digital transformation is not something that you take on, just because you want to take it on. And in all honesty, most organizations are going through it in departments with them not necessarily have even created a strategy around it. So to answer your question about pace, pace of IT is moving so quickly right now, and you have all these abundance of tools and automations and platforms that you can use. You can do them in different ways. You use data warehouses. You can use RPA. You can use API direct connections and all kinds of things. So IT maturity comes into play. Is your organization prepared for that? Is your staff prepared for that? Are you ready for this potentially? If you look at a broader organization, not just IT or IT service management, are you ready for that several year journey where IT service management it could be quite a bit smaller or shorter time frame? But from a IT maturity perspective, to touch on, that is your operational maturity really matters, because you need to have the right people, you need to have the right process, you need to make sure that your data is in certain systems. Like you can have closed off systems that don't allow you really to easily pull that data. So then you got customizations around that. Do you have the right technology and tools to have the ability to really process some of that data? And so if you're an organization that's really low IT maturity, more in a chaotic state, it's very difficult for you to take advantage of digital transformation, right? You have to really progress through the IT maturity model to get to more of what we would consider a stable and standardized state, right? Where you're looking at being more proactive in nature. And what I mean by that is you understand your systems, you're pulling information from systems already. You have visibility, you're more proactive in nature from your monitoring and your management, and how your ticket data is coming in and other sources of data. You have the ability to pull from other systems as well, right? You might not have the platforms yet to kind of process that, but that's really where you start to move more into the predictive and automate, where you're like, okay, I know where my data is coming from. I know the processes that need to really be matured. I understand what systems needs what data from other areas to automate. And then when you're in that predictive and automate state, you have the right tools or platforms to implement to take advantage of some of those process things. That really gives you the ability to move into true digital transformation, right? With that level of maturity, these disruptors that hit your organization or hit IT, you're able to move quicker. You're able to really, I would say, mitigate the risk associated with some of these disruptors as well, like the pace of IT or other businesses are doing things this way, speed to market and other things like that. But you're setting yourself up for the ability to transform your organization by moving across that maturity model.
Got it. So,
Hey, James,
sorry.
sorry to interrupt, guys, but we had a question come in really quick. The question is, what percentage of organizations have a low IT maturity?
Loaded question. No, I'm just joking. Honestly, it's kind of interesting. So, depending on the profile of the client, I would say a born in the cloud type client could have a medium maturity. Some start to scale really quick, those same type of clients or companies, and then they start to regress and go back to the older way of doing things because they're like, we don't have the time to keep up with that. Then they go back to lower maturity. I would say it's really dependent on certain areas. Like if a client has a really good investment strategy in IT, they tend to sit middle of the road. If they have a lower investment strategy in overall IT service management, they do sit on the low, they sit in the lower end of IT maturity if they don't really have an investment strategy. So, and then it actually gets a little more complicated than that. They might have a great people process. They could have a poor process, like how processes are identified. So they could have low maturity in process areas or data or even technology, but great with people or vice versa. So it's not just a simple 20%, right? I would say most people sit between reactive and proactive. Um, Most organizations sit in that realm, to be honest. So,
Hey, James,
yeah.
just a follow-up question on this, and I know we have to move on, but is this potentially by department as well? Like, so with the birth of cloud, we had different departments doing different IT decisions, and does IT almost have to rein all those siloed decisions that happened back in to be able to look at digital transformation so they could do a full inventory and assessment of everything that's out there?
Yeah, I would so the days of one area kind of owning it, it is true, like IT has to rein it in, but IT needs to change its way of thinking to be able to do that. So the way I like to say it is you need to have a digital transformation team, group, or innovation type group or center that is collaborating with each department equally because we're all driving towards the same business outcomes, right? The business wants to achieve X, every department has to jump, has to jump on that bandwagon and say, okay, what's our part? How do we share our data? How do we process this? How do we utilize your tools, your people, and these other departments? So it is more of a collaborative type initiative, as well as you got to unlock the security of the data. Not sorry, you have to unlock the data silos but still have security. And that's where the portability piece comes into play.
Got it. Got it. Let's go to the next slide and just talk about some of the benefits associated with automation, if you wouldn't mind just talking through it. You started mentioning some of them, and I think it's a good segue.
Yeah. Um, you know, Quicker process time. So that's one. And I would say just benefits of automation are several. One, you become more efficient from an organization perspective, which of course leads to financial savings or cost savings and things like that. Better collaboration across departments, standardization. So if you have any type of regulatory compliance or those type of things, you're able to standardize processes, you're able to have audit documentation there because you're utilizing an automated process, right? Other things are just, I would also kind of say culture, um, because you're making people's jobs easier as well. You're making it standard. The critical piece to that, though, and we'll touch on this in other areas, is um, you have to implement feedback loops when you start using automations. You can't just turn them on and let them run and not get the buy-in from your organization of, is it really processing appropriately? Because you can create automations to the point where it just is as cumbersome, or more cumbersome than the manual process that you created, right? It might be too restrictive. So you really need to make sure that you understand the cultural impacts of automation as well and collaborate with the end users and different levels within the organization. But if you do that, the impact on culture is massive. You're able to quickly process things. You're able to mitigate risk from organization, kind of disruptors that could hit your organization. I mean, COVID's a great example of that. If companies were heavier in automation and some other, processing type things like that, COVID would have not been a disruptor for some. And that also goes back into IT maturity though, too.
So you mentioned collaboration or across departments. And I've heard the term silo mentioned many times.
Mhm.
So in just taking on the initiative of digital transformation and automation, does it create collaboration among the different departments because they have to talk to each other because things are getting handed off from one to the other, or is it more intentional, or is it a byproduct?
No, so it does kind of break down the doors, and I'll give you an example. One key thing every organization, every department almost shares is identity of an employee. So from the recruitment process, the identity of the really the employee starts. That data gets shared, and most organizations it's not automated, right? Like, so it is might be automated within the HR team, but then it goes over into an email ticket, right? And then from there, it's like, oh, I got to go create that in sales or in marketing, and then my Active Directory account. Then I have to, so then you just have these manual handoffs. But at the end of the day, if you look at it appropriately and be like, hey, we share this item, which is the identity. How do we process that all the way down into the financial system? So we create the right user accounts, we create the right AD account. We make sure that that gets created in the financial system with a click of a button with approvals, because we all need to share in that data. Now that starts in the HR system. So I need to have a platform that pulls from there and populates it in other areas and confirms that and sends out the notifications, kicks off a purchasing of laptops, right? So that's just one example of an automation, right? That where we all share the data. There's hundreds of different ones, but that's just one I think that everybody kind of overlooks as a simple onboarding process, but it could be 30 systems that actually gets populated into, and user accounts and sub distribution lists and you name it. But you're thinking, I'm just creating it for him to log in, right? Or to be just an employee. So
Got it. Got it. You know what? So what you just described, Jordan, if we could move to the next slide, I think, just hearing that one example or use case makes me question, how do you actually start doing this or tackling it? Would you mind talking us through a little bit of what's required for automation? How do we get there? Give us a little bit of what the journey looks like, please.
yeah, so the first one, it really and I don't want to read the bullets, but one, you have to assess the maturity of your organization. Do you have the right people that can look at what needs to be done? And honestly, um, it's not all about your managers. It is also about your end users or the people on the ground, the ones that are processing these type of things, asking questions of like, how long does it take you to do X Like, I want to sit with you. I want to know what it takes to do that. Not the process that's on paper, the process that's actually being done every day, right? So assessing the maturity of your organization and the processes, that's a big thing. One, that's also identifying the heavy tasks. So understanding, is that process really the way you have it documented, how it's really operating? What's the load associated with that? Okay, now we need to redefine that. Okay, where does that data originate? So it could originate in HR, it could originate in other areas. Where does it flow? Then you start to create the standards associated with that. So, okay, this is the way it should work. Here's what we should be doing. This abides by our by regulatory compliance requirements, right? Okay, how do we see that data? What departments can't see that data that need that data? And then really you start to look at the data itself is like, okay, where does it go within our organization? Then you start the streamlining process of it to say, okay, here's how it's going to occur here. We know where it's at. We know that we've standardized it. We know that we can see it. We know the data is there. And then now we've created the streamline automation or process, right? You've digitized the process. Now you need to create the feedback loop associated with that to ensure that that process that you've identified, right, is working. And it's kind of a stack of looking at these different type of processes within the organization and tying them back to, okay, we need to move faster and process our orders quicker to get, our clients onboarded quicker, to recognize revenue quicker, right? Okay, now let's look at the associated process with that. You can do the same thing with an IT. What are the most common requests that we have? What are the processes that we have? And then you just start going down the list of those, and then you go through that process to really redefine them, standardize them, and you kind of follow this outline to get really the realized benefit.
So what you just talked through, first of all, thank you. I think that says all the things that are involved, but
Mhm.
in my mind, we're talking about processes in departments across the board. Could be customer engagement. It could be anywhere. And I feel like there's so many opportunities to automate and people pushing for that to happen, or we need to happen to react to it. How do you actually assess and prioritize, what you attack first? And then, should you be focused internally and driving those automations, or should you be focused externally with clients, things that are associated with revenue? And is it better to do it internally first so that you can cut your teeth, or do you go client facing because it's higher profile, so you're going to get the funding behind it to actually execute? What how do you prioritize this? Because I could see tons of automation opportunities.
Yeah, and honestly, that's one of the areas where people fail, right? They're not aligning it to an initiative, right? So I'll give you an example, just business initiative. If your business initiative, say, I'll use the example of signing a new client. If if that is taking too long, we know it's taking too long, the clients are unhappy with that, then you focus on that process. Okay, how am I going to streamline my revenue recognition process, basically? What you're going to start to uncover is, one, it takes forever for me to create the information for the client. Then it goes to another department. Then that data gets entered in manually. So when you start to outline a business initiative in the organization, you start to uncover different kind of processes that spawn from that are going to be IT related and non-IT related, right? So I like to say focus on the business initiatives first to understand what you're trying to do, because to your point, those are revenue impacting and those are the areas you need to focus. But what you're going to start to uncover is internally, you're going to identify processes that need to be done regardless. And I'll give you an example with us internally is, as we look through the quote to cash process, we identified, oh, we could do this with RPA, and we can take in consideration that we need to fix the identity access management process as well through that by just looking at the way we onboard a new, we basically take an opportunity all the way to cash, right? So it started to uncover things, and where you don't get lost is, oh, let me just tag on those 600 other sub processes. You start with the business initiative and then you work there, right? You're going to find other areas for process improvement, and some might not be digital transformation. They might just be process, redefining your processes or streamlining processes. Those aren't necessarily always digital transformation items. They can feed into it for sure, but it doesn't mean some of those are going to be automated, right? So really, I would say start with the business initiatives, and then drive those through, and then start parking lot items that you have as secondary items to tackle.
So
James,
sorry, go
sorry
ahead.
to interrupt, guys. We had another question come in talking about doing this right and all that. The question is, how long does this take to do this right?
It depends, honestly. I mean, we've seen an organization, we've seen 5 years, we've seen 3 years, we've seen 2 years. It could be 1 year, just depending on the initiatives at hand, right? So, and really from there, then it becomes a continuous improvement. So I would say it's a journey, it's not a destination. Like we say about security, once you've identified what the business initiative that you want to tackle, you could continually be revamping processes and procedures. Now, your initial one, if you want to focus on like HR, that could be a 6-month initiative, and you take that on. But then you're going to pick up, now we need to tackle the accounting side of it that's associated with that. That could be another 6-month initiative, right? So you can kind of see, if you go department by department like that, you're going to start to see that it might be 6 months, another 6 months, a year, and so on and so on. It just really depends on really how much you transform or how much you need to transform. So,
James, along those lines, as you do more, does your speed to transformation increase because you get better, because your data sources are better, because, do you learn along the way, and are there efficiencies in the actual transformation automation process?
definitely, because as you start to identify what you're going to, I mean, the key thing is identifying the business processes and or the business initiative, and what systems are impacted. Kenny, to answer that is yes, it speeds up because you've identified like the tools that you want to use for that. You've streamlined how you're going to onboard these processes. I will say, once you start identifying and implementing like RPA type initiatives to help out and streamline things, you become more proficient in it. Um, then you can almost push that into other departments to say, hey, we're going to train you on how to do this, you execute on this. Now you're kind of spreading the workload as well, but you do become more proficient and you're able to roll these things out. But governance, like I'll say, is always the big thing. You need to make sure you have the right governance. You're getting the feedback from the user base to make sure that the impact that you're having on the culture is really a good one. That's where digital transformations fail, even on the service management side, is not really listening to really the organization and how it's impacting them, because you could think you're doing things great, but you just made it so cumbersome, it will fail. So.
Got it. So you mentioned RPA a couple times. Can you, for those that aren't familiar with RPA, can you just explain it? I don't like acronyms. I think you know that.
I only know the acronym. I'm not, no. So robotic process automation. So really what that is think of having a recorder that looks at how you process something, right? So what are the steps that it takes? So it records those processes, those steps, and it automates those for you. So I get an invoice via email. I scrape that invoice, which might be a PDF. I input that data into certain fields. It validates it, checks it, submits it for you. shoots off a approval, then it auto approves it and then sends it into the financial system, right? Like that would be a very quick high level RPA type initiative that you could take on. It can go from account creation. So if the data is if the data can be read, then it could be pushed and automated, in that form, right? Using RPA. It could be creating a user account. It could be taking the data out of Salesforce and building out, within your ticketing system, certain items or projects, you name it. But basically, if I can read the data, then I can push it along a process and auto fill out forms and auto approve based on what you've designed.
Got it. So, I think we have to sort of move on from the how to get there to, so we've talked about the benefits, we talked about sort of how to get there, but what's the ROI? Let's talk to that, and also, how do you create budgets for scenarios that you might not know what it will take? I mean, like, so as you're assessing and doing these things, how do you create a budget? And how do you show an ROI to the business when it feels like some of this might not be tangible? Or we don't really know what the true outcome is going to be, and it sounds like we're constantly tweaking it. How do you position, budgeting? How do you position ROI? How do you do these things? And maybe we could talk through some of these things that are listed here.
Yeah, I'll give a high level really quick is digital transformation or digital transformation from an IT services perspective is a J curve, right? It is not like this line that goes straight up, right? It goes, I made an investment and now on the output, you're gonna kind of like fire up, right? You're gonna quickly go up from a cost savings perspective. So I always say, don't think digital transformation or digital transformation from an IT services perspective does not come without some type of cost, right? So you need to do the prep work that it takes. So you'll have investments in tools and technology and people and process. But the outcome is speed to market. And honestly, it's not just your traditional ROI. It's not just, oh, here's my dollars that I'm saving. It's reducing the burnout of your employees as well. It's a shift in the culture as well. It drives a culture of innovation within your employee base as well. Of like, oh, the company can do this. Well, I'm going to take my ideas to them. And I alluded to like an innovation center or feedback loops. They're critical because then your people become kind of the thinkers in the organizations to better help streamline initiatives by you creating that mechanism for them to give ideas and they become the thinkers of the organizations and really help drive some of that stuff. So those are some of the non-standard ROI type items, but I mean efficiencies gained. So you're cutting down on the amount of FTE hours, so full-time equivalent hours. Like I'll give you a quick example of that is we were running through just like, oh, account creation process. Well, it was taking like 1,000 hours to do this. Well, you cut that hours down to 34 minutes for the year because you mapped out the process, you drove out the inefficiencies, you automated the steps that you needed to take, and instead of having IT initiate it, you had HR initiated the workflow, and it kicked off and ran through and dropped the ticket in and have a good day. The user got an email and they're ready, they're off to the races, right? So it's things like that that are ROI. Those are measurable of hours saved in the organization. The other one is really scalability, and I'll say from like mergers and acquisition perspective, if you have automated processes and procedures like that, you're mitigating quite a bit of risks of bringing somebody on. Now they're like, oh, I can go to this digital workplace portal. I can do this self-service automation. You have that pre-canned training already. So one of being able to ingest companies, from either mergers and acquisitions, that's another metric. But then you can do more with the same amount of people or with less people in your organization by streamlining and automating the processes as well. So.
Hey, James, we had another question come in. They ask, how can we integrate chatbots and Teams integration into our DYOPATH help desk solution?
Yeah, so I will answer that one in our tech talk because that's something that is rolling out. But I will, Jordan, I'll release that one in our internal tech talk if that's all right.
Yeah, sounds good.
So, James, talking about some of the ROIs and the intangibles. So, I know we work with a lot of clients that are getting spun out or they're ingesting new organizations. Um, Having the experience with automation, digital transformation, does that give you a leg up to be able to onboard and acquire faster and show proven efficiencies that like PE firms look at and are looking to, as they're rolling out multiple organizations, they're looking at things like that. Is that a reality? Are people doing that?
They are. I mean, we have an initiative internally called Project D3, which is data-driven DYOPATH, right? It is that kind of that way of thinking is it's data-driven. So everything is measurable at that point in time. So if I can ingest a company quicker, onboard them, I can process moving over accounts into us, right? We can onboard them into new services. All of them are quantifiable, right? These are metrics. Our ticket counts did this. Our event correlations did that. Our onboarding times went from here to there. We processed X more requests through HR, right? That all those things become quantifiable, and the outcome, like we are doing and revamping, and like through Project D3 is more of an enterprise dashboard with KPI metrics across the entire organization. So an enterprise health scorecard, basically, that's data driven, right? That is more valuable, right? That helps you understand when you have demand through either mergers and acquisitions or you name it, right? New accounts, you're able to see the impacts of those type of things. Could be disruptors or initiatives. You can see the impacts across the organization because now you're more data driven and you can see the metrics associated with those.
Got it. So, hey, James, I know you said you wanted to talk about that integrate chat in an internal TED Talk that you're doing, and I know you do those. Not everybody might be privy to those.
Yep.
So let's say you're a client and you have our help desk solution and you're trying to understand, is there a way to integrate to Teams? I'm not looking at you to give an architectural explanation. I'm just wondering, can you touch on it very briefly, but sort of paint a vision of what that could look like or how that
Yeah,
would work?
definitely. So I'll touch on it from an IT services management. So yes, integrating chat with Teams integrated into like a client's Teams channel definitely can be something that's done. It even goes further from an IT services management perspective. So you can expose knowledge, you can expose, having questions submitted and answered in near real time. Also having it in different languages, right? The other piece of it though too is internal service management perspective. So being able to initiate chats and other things like that. Sorry. Um, can you hear me?
Still there? I got you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sorry. So being able to initiate chats and things like that within the organization, so using internal chat and Teams to do escalations through different chat channels. All those things are capable with chatbot, and integrating them with Microsoft Teams. So
Got it. So in my mind, what I hear you saying is there very much is a path to do it. And it's just a question of how do you want to do it? Where do you want to go with it? But there's options to discuss.
There is options to discuss, and like anything, you need to define what you're trying to achieve, and and because you can open up a can of worms, I would say. So you need to have a vision and then create the plan to execute on that vision. So
Awesome. That goes back to the first step to assess what you're looking to do, align it with your business goals, and then start down the automation process. So thanks for talking through that. One thing that we hear, we mention, I've heard compliance now probably 5, 6 times throughout this. Can you paint a picture or give me an image or give me hope? Because compliance is heavy, right?
mhm.
And it's a big ask. How does automation help with that? How does it improve regulatory compliance?
Yeah, I'll start with the whole identity access management thing, right? So for SOC compliance, SOC 2 type compliance, you need to show artifacts for certain things, right? Um, if I'm automating the process from recruiting an employee to having the process to create the identity in multiple systems, enabling single sign-on, all those type of things, and then having that information dump into a ticket and then auto closing out when that ticket's done, right? And then or to be reviewed. Um, in the past, those items weren't necessarily always recorded. So now you can see from inception to maybe the offboarding of that same client, 10 years from now. Basically, what you're able to see is the progression, how it flowed through, the note that was associated that this account was created, the automation that was associated with that a human did not touch this or forget to disable this account. One of the things that we've enabled is, the onboarding and offboarding type process type stuff that we're working through. So, by doing that, you have this record of I did this or the process did this, and you can show proof for that, right? Automating even how you handled certain type of incidents and those type of things play into regulatory compliance. The automation of, okay, we had a security event. What happened and how did it trigger the right process flow? You can prove it because the automations are there, right? So when you're kind of taking out that human element in some of these things, it's streamlining it for people and automatically delivering it to the people that need to see it. You have a trail, you have that cookie, kind of trail. So those things help, and especially as you go through like SOC audits and things like that. Oh, let me show your artifacts. Cool. Let me show the RPA process that's associated with this. Now I'll show you an example of the ticket that was created and closed. Those are powerful. Those are powerful things.
Got it. So in my mind, it's doing that auto tracking, creating the artifacts, and giving the proof, which is it's the proof of burden, right, to show that you're in compliance. And so it's speeding that access to that data to be able to share and get done without having to go and track it all down.
Yeah,
Is that
it is. And I would say the other thing is it's adding consistency, right? So like if anybody has ever played sports, you want to be as consistent as you possibly can in the way you play your sport, right? So you're adding this consistency to your organization because it's flowing the exact same way every single time. You're not adding in inconsistencies.
got it? Thank you. So let's start. So I have to tell you, I only have a capacity to absorb so much information, and then I have to sort of go through it all. Can we go through some of the key takeaways that we've covered today? And I have some questions for you on this, James. So, we talked culture here and there. I heard the word innovation. The question that I have for you around culture is not one of those things you just flip on and off. So how or where does it need to start the culture shift? Because I feel like automation, yes, it's going to do it, but you could have fear of loss of jobs. You're automating to get rid of, to drive bottom line. It could create sort of a culture of, you're looking to replace or minimize what I do. How do you avoid that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So really culture is critical because you need the buy-in of the end users, right? They need to understand what's trying to be achieved through the business goal. They're also the front lines that provide the validation that we need to change certain things, right? What is, sitting down with people and asking the simple questions, what does your workday look like? How do you process this, right? So if we know what the business initiative is, we need to process X faster. We need to be able to compete in this market. And here's the way we're going to do it. Interviewing them and understanding what their day to day is and realizing that, hey, this is not going to work and it's going to burden our individuals is creating. We need to innovate as an organization. So I say this internally is like we're creating a trailer for a movie. Like we're going to be innovating. Here's why we're going to be innovating. We need your assistance and your help to innovate. Getting their feedback on the process, the procedures that need to change within the organization, understanding that we can't do that without them, right? And that's at the people level, that's at the manager level, that's at the department levels, because they're going to have to unlock some of their data, right? That traditionally they might not have. You're going to have to collaborate with different teams. So it's culture is critical because you need to have a culture of innovation, but you also need to make sure that you have a culture of collaboration as well. And then you have to have strong leaders that are really pushing that so people understand what is trying to be achieved. Because if you don't, then you won't achieve the change that you're trying to drive forward or drive to.
Got it. So that whole mindset and shift of, it's a never-ending journey
Mhm.
and continuous improvement, I think is really an important thing. We talked about, the need to measure and get your data points.
Mhm.
Can you reinforce why you need to measure and how, if you're potentially not measuring, things could go wrong?
Yeah, so I would almost allude this to like how you were talking about aligning to the business initiative you're trying to achieve. Like if you're not measuring and out clearly defining what you're trying to achieve or the measurables associated with that, you're gonna go down multiple rabbit holes during this process. It keeps you on target. It makes you understand really, I would say also the efficiency gain with the process. So to my comment of, you could create the process, so many processes and automate them, and it now becomes so cumbersome. Most people do that because they're not measuring the process. They're like, oh, I can go automate this and I can go automate that. Well, what's the outcome? What's the desired outcome for the organization that you define for this initiative? What are the associated KPIs that you need to be watching for this to ensure that it's operating the way you want it to operate, right? Or are you just automating to automate? That's not what you need to be doing. You have to have a measurable outcome associated with that before you start down that process. If not, it's a loss leader type approach.
Got it. So the last bullet here, says outside help is needed. So can we talk about what that means and why you want outside or an outside party? So for me, like I think about engaging somebody to look at my process procedures, IT from the outside. The benefit is they don't live, they're not close enough to it. They're not emotionally tied to that purchase or that server or that process that started that, it debated, we debated it for, months and we finally made a decision. Was it the right decision? Maybe not, but we're sticking with it because emotionally I have baggage there. Or even experience, right? They might not ever have gone through this. So what type of outside help and what lens do you think of when you think about bringing in somebody from the outside?
Yeah, I think you said a key word there is the baggage piece, right? Most organizations, I'd say they're so people are so inundated in doing their job, so hyper focused on that or micro focused on their day to day. Sometimes it's difficult for them, or not even feasible for them to step out and say, how should this be running versus, oh no, that's the way it's going to run. We try to do this differently. It only works this way. But also they're not having the time, and this is the innovation pieces. They're not having the time to sit back and say, I don't need to worry about the way it's running today. I need to innovate and say, okay, this is the way it needs to run from an outside perspective, right? To kind of think you could probably see the Steve Jobs quote behind me. It's like, I always like to tell people, it's like, I don't want to do things better than everybody else. I want to do them differently, right? So that outside help gives you the ability to look at things differently, not just to improve or do better the process that might not really be working, right? Or so it allows you to step back and look at things through a different lens with outside views and people to have experience, right? Of saying, oh, we did it this way, we did it differently. Oh, I didn't know that was even feasible, because they don't experience that in their day to day, right? That's the value, is the expertise, the trial and error as well of what works, what doesn't work. But really, it's the ability to step out and see things differently, utilize the use cases or really the trial and errors of other organizations. That's why I say from an outside help. The other piece of it is just resource and time constraints that it takes to implement these things.
Yeah.
It's going to fail if you just try to do it all internally. I've yet to see an organization that they don't dedicate teams or people to it, or bring in help to help run these things and keep them on track. So.
Got it. Thanks, James. So, hey, Jordan, can we just, we have a couple minutes left here, a few minutes. Can we open up Q&A and just see if we have any other questions or something that's burning on somebody's mind? I think we covered a lot. And James, I just want to say thank you for going through all of that. And I appreciate the information and always chatting with you. But do we have any questions, Jordan?
As of right now, I don't have any new questions, but if anyone on the line does have a question, now is the time to put it in the chat or message me and let me know if you'd like for me to unmute you.
Got it. And just while we're waiting to see if there are any questions, I just want to make everybody aware that if you haven't had the chance to read, we have a couple blogs that are out there. And Jordan, perhaps we could send links when we send out a copy of this presentation and the recording, links to those blogs so that people have those resources available to them. And, based on my experience, I will say every time we talk about digital transformation, whether it's where do you start or what do you do or what the ROI is, I always come up with new questions and things about it, and having a resource like James, I think, is invaluable. So I think it's a great thing to continue to share and bring to the market. So any questions come in, or are we good?
No, none as of right now, but yes, to the blogs, agreed. All of this information is scattered throughout our blogs, and I will include those in the follow-up to this presentation.
All right. Well then, if we have no further questions, I'd like to wrap it up right on time and just thank everybody for their participation. And if you have questions or want to talk more about it, please contact your DYOPATH rep. And if you don't know who it is, you can reach out to solutions@dyopath.com and we'll be happy to assist.
That's right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.